Hi everyone, thanks for joining. We're going to begin it in just a little bit. I'm just doing some audio checks. Thank you for your patience. All right, so we're going to go ahead and kick this off. Thank you to everyone joining us today. I'm just going to go over a few quick house rules before we kick things off. Please use the question section on the right-hand side of the screen to ask questions throughout this panel. We will be holding questions for the end, and we understand that we may not be able to cover them all during the Q&A section, so please be patient with us. We will be sharing the presentation video recording link following the live presentation. Again, thank you for joining us today, and I will be passing it off to Melissa now.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the new normal for AdTech and Digital Media. We're excited to be here today. We have a great panel scheduled to learn a little more about what normal means and what we think the fourth quarter is going to be holding. I want to start by introducing our panelists. Eric Berry is the co-founder and CEO of TripleLift, a company which utilizes technology to deliver scalable, consumer-centric advertising. Eric has a background in not just technology, but in engineering and law, which gives him a unique position in the world of advertising and digital media. Joshua Nex is the co-founder and president of SimonData, a platform that focuses on customer data to create data-backed customer experiences. SimonData was recently named a Cool Vendor in the multi-channel marketing by Gartner in their 2020 Cool Vendors report. Richard Sheldon is the CFO of 33Across. 33Across works in the ad tech space to tie creativity and technology to programmatic principles. Outside of 33Across, Richard has had a successful career as the CFO for many technology companies, including Complex Media, and lends unique wealth of experience to his job. I'm Melissa Roth from Withum. I'll be one of your moderators for today. A little bit about Withum. We're the 6th largest advisory, tax, and audit firm in the Mid-Atlantic region. And as a firm, we represent a lot of different industry verticals. I'm the team lead for the AdTech and Digital Media vertical, and I focus on accounting, advisory, and audit portion of the advertising space, as well as the companies that work within that space. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to our other moderator, Jeff, to introduce himself.
Hey everyone, Jeff Austin at Fastpay. I'm the Director of Business Development on the capital side of things. If you're not familiar, Fastpay is the premier B2B lender and payments network for all things related to media. We partner with suppliers in the space to understand their working capital needs and structured credit facilities for growth, acquisitions, and cash flow management. Really thank everyone for joining us today, along with the panelists, Richard, Josh, and Eric. And without much further ado, we'd like to hop into this. So to begin, we'd like to start with just the respective company cultures while folks are working from home and what you guys are seeing at your companies as well. So I would love to hear from you guys as to how's morale, what kind of culture are you guys implementing while employees are working remotely, and then are any of you guys returning to the workspace anytime soon?
I'm happy to go first. Well, my co-founder, when we started the business 5 years ago, was insistent that our engineering team be remote, and I thought he was crazy. And it feels very prescient now to have built at least half of our team into like a remote workforce ahead of the pandemic. I think it has eased the transition for us tremendously. I think there's the sort of day-to-day alignment of like what's happening and how is information shared and how do you prevent information silos. And I think we had a lot of those systems in place, trying to make sure that, you're not going to be able to rely on those passing in the hall style conversations and using shared project management software and ensuring compliance and sort of all of the things that, come from a really robust investment in a distributed workforce. And so I think we had a lot of those best practices already in place. I think the harder adjustment for us has been more on the commercial side, where obviously we had invested heavily in digital channels as a way of reaching customers and prospects and engaging with them. But events probably constituted 40% of our budget, for reaching new folks and 40% of our estimated lead volume. And when that went away, we had to invest super heavily in digital and remote events, and we've had a lot of success with executive roundtables and other formats. But I think that plus changes in buyer behavior, how decisions are made in this environment, what decisions can get made, adjusting the team to that dynamic, performance management within that context, that's been a lot more tricky. I think what is a realistic goal has changed, what is a realistic workflow has changed, but I feel like we're starting to get our feet under us.
Happy to add in, which is, we had some conversations early on about, and those conversations have certainly evolved about whether we want to be a remote friendly company or a remote first company. And we made the decision that we wanted to be, and this is a question of when it's all said and done and, the hopeful future that when we're back to work post-COVID, that we don't want a fully remote workforce. And this is our company decision, which is that we want to, there's certainly some value to folks not coming in some days of the work and some days of the week, and people can do really good, high concentration work without distractions. But at the same time, we've definitely seen some decrease in the overall quality of the collaboration that's happened in the sort of fully remote world, and people's kind of world view of who they have exposure to on a day-to-day basis certainly declines as well. Despite we do all the gimmicks that everybody does, and notwithstanding that, it doesn't really, from our perspective, there's still a lot of value in coming back to work. So we will have a full New York office when it's all said and done. We're fortunate in that our office leases up in October, so we will be completely without an office or rent for like 6 to 9 months. But we are exploring the real question of what does an office look like if we expect people in the office 2 to 3 days a week. What are we optimizing for? How many desks should we have relative to the number of people that are there? Are people going to be comfortable in a shared desk world? Are they going to be comfortable if they don't have a guarantee that they will have desks on any given day coming in? If that's not the case, then are we shooting ourselves in the foot by trying to get collaboration, et cetera? So there's a lot of questions that I think remain really unsolved. It's also possible I've deviated quite a bit from your original question, but that's my thoughts.
That's great. So we were definitely one of the companies that wasn't sure whether 100% remote would work. So we certainly encouraged people to maybe work from home 1 day a week. And so when this all sort of came down, we weren't sure how it was going to work. I'm definitely glad to say that it's working really well. We certainly had some hiccups along the way, I'm sure, like everybody else, but and we certainly agree that there isn't quite the same level of collaboration and because of the lack of face-to-face. But we've been very pleasantly surprised as to how the work has been able to continue, how we've been able to really dig down and work. I think everybody working from home, part of the issue has been that people don't know where the end of work is. Where is work? Where is your regular life? And so you have to try and encourage people to take days off or to take hours off or whatever it is that you can do. And we've been trying to encourage people to share more. And I think at one point we actually overshared, and we've been doing more weekly surveys. And so some of the feedback was, guys, you're overburdening us with meetings. And so we sort of stepped back on that. But what we do is we do a daily war room report at 9:30 every morning. And I think what we've seen is a lot more people are coming to that in order to be able to learn what's going on, in order to be part of the company. Otherwise, it can be a little lonely if you're just dealing with your own, just with your own group. We've encouraged surveys. We have a weekly happy hour, although not that many people turn up to it. And actually, some of the fun stuff we did was introduce some new Slack channels. So, but specific channels for fun stuff like, quarantainment. My personal favorite is we introduced a food channel so that people show the food that they've made either for lunch or dinner. And people are unbelievably creative, and it makes you a little hungry during the day to see all the photos. But and we made the CEO have a 15-minute to 30-minute meeting every week with people where he just sort of talks about things just to try and keep the communication going, because you're not in the office. But overall, I'd say it's actually been pretty good, and it's working out well. Now we're only 6 months in, and what does it look like in another 6 months? I'm not sure, but
yeah, I just wanted to add that I think from our perspective, there's a real difference between working remotely during COVID and working remotely not during COVID. And everybody's expectations right now are like, everybody gets it. And it's also the case that everybody sort of has to play ball, but it's not clear that. And we did surveys. We said in the post-COVID world, how much do you want to come into work? And among like 100 other questions, and by far the common, it was 2 to 3 days a week. That was like, those two numbers were about 75 to 80% of our employee base. And then 0 and 5 were the next two, which is hard to optimize for both of those together. But one of my informal advisors is the former CEO of Sony Pictures when they got hacked by North Korea. And another thing he said, which I think was really smart, was that in the very beginning, everybody was kind of operating on adrenaline and emotions and the like. So they had to work remotely, and it was a whole to do. But that drags on, and all your best intentions and all your best efforts and all your best things that you think maybe are addressing the issues, like at the end of the day, it's going to be like a Tuesday afternoon. It's really Tuesday afternoon now, but it's going to be like a Tuesday afternoon, and someone's going to be doing their job, and they're going to be remote, and they're going to not have seen their friends for like 2 months, and there's nothing you can do about it. And you have to think about that particular context. because that's when things really great, and that's the culture that we're really trying to think about, both during COVID and post-COVID. How do we kind of create the best scenario for just the reality that's unfortunate, which is we have junior people that are in studios that they haven't gotten out of in a long time, and it's just really tough.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Obviously, there are a lot of issues related to getting the office back up and running. We actually were in middle of the process of moving from the 12th floor to the 4th floor. We'd signed a new lease or an extension of our lease in December of 2019. And so the site was being built out, and then we were about 2 weeks away from completion before COVID closed everything down. So we did actually move all of the stuff, but the office is completely, nobody's been in there. But our biggest issue is mass transit. The people who live in the city can get to the office relatively safely. But if you're coming in on mass transit, what does that mean? Are you willing to, to be in that environment? And we have people coming in from Jersey and Westchester and Long Island, and that's probably our biggest concern as we think about people coming back into the office in 2020.
Great, thank you. So now that we've talked a little bit about internal operations and kind of culture and looking inward, what best practices have you implemented looking more at client facing? So what do you think you're going to be doing going forward that you have changed because of this new normal that we see? Eric, would you mind kicking that off?
Sure. Well, I mean, personally, we have operations around the globe, and I used to have to fly to Germany, and I do not care for my time in the airplane. And so, one, to the extent that we can keep this stuff alive, like having Zoom meetings with people in Germany as opposed to people expecting in-person meetings, that I think that would be great. That would be the absolute best. This is going to be a refrain for me, but like people's expectations right now are just different than they have been and will be. And so, we sell to all sorts of people, but they expect us to be selling to them in the way that is the reality for how we sell to them now. And it remains to be seen how people will expect to be sold to in the future. And so, we don't do in-person meetings, obviously, but will people expect in-person meetings 2 years from now? It's anybody's guess, and we don't control it. Like our customers will control it. And so we do, we do the webinars, we do the, virtual wine tastings, we do all that stuff that, I think is, as far as we can tell, best of breed. But that's like for the environment. And so, I think just the big question is like, how does this evolve? Even like gifts, we used to have a like 6-figure holiday gift budget, and for our customers. Do they expect that this year or not? And our view is no, they don't. They expect something, and probably, in light of how the world is moving, something more charitably oriented than like, personal goods oriented. But yeah, so I don't know that there's a great answer for how things are going today, other than you have to deal with the current environment, and we're just waiting to see how it evolves.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there's a lot of nuance in the question that I think is easy to overlook, because what we found is, we're similar to the other folks on this call, a challenger in some ways, in our market, and I think that the dynamics of a challenger sale are more impacted and in some ways more challenging than they've ever been than than like a more standard sale. So like we compete against folks like Salesforce and Adobe, and that's great, and we're happy to, and we want to, and we knew that's what we would be doing when we got into the business. I think what I've noticed is that there's been a real, it's a lot easier to go with the ship that got you there today, you know, because of the environment, as Eric said. You know, people are much less risk inclined and much more inclined to kind of like keep things stable. So for our existing customers, expanding our relationship has been actually quite easy. People are inclined to try things. They're comfortable with us. They know who we are, and there are lots of opportunities for us to do that. I think, you know, one of the things that allows challenger companies to be successful is being able to get in front of you, you know, being able to do some of those differentiated things that Eric was speaking to. And you know, certainly we've done all manner of crazy things and taken all kinds of ill-advised flights to Singapore and other places. And I think in some ways, you know, having the CEO or the founder show up on the doorstep and deliver an incredibly compelling in the room presentation, like, is able to overcome a lot of that natural resistance. And then also you're able to do the other thing that's required in a challenger type environment, which is bring together disparate stakeholders that might not otherwise want to get there. And they have to fully focus because they're in the room and they can't be paying attention to something else. And so, you know, I found that, yeah, maybe we're able to get all the stakeholders from insert giant financial services company here, you know, to our webinars and, you know, on the Zoom call, and, you know, we're able to discover their challenges with their existing solutions and do all of that wonderful stuff. But there's like a level of abstraction and distraction that I think the remote environment engenders. And I think this is why, despite seeing a lot of businesses in SaaS businesses generally, and AdTech businesses more specifically, move to a largely inside sales force, you know, enterprise deals have sort of always remained an outlier. You know, and enterprise relationships have still required on the ground in-person stuff largely. It's not to say that some businesses aren't successful, you know, operating remotely, and the bigger you are and the more momentum you have, the easier it is. But, you know, even the folks at Snowflake who are IPOing this week for an ungodly sum of money, you know, assure me that they've noticed the same things, you know, as they've, you know, sought to convert business in this environment. So I think it's interesting to think about, you know, for now, what are the things that, if anything, are going to allow brands, to challenger type brands or smaller mid-sized businesses, to have the same level of success. You know, the ad tech space is super interesting in that way. And then in the future state, if things do take on more of a remote, you know, character, you know, how is that going to evolve or not, and who will win or lose based on that?
Yeah, great points about growth, and certainly for new companies. More established companies, 33Cross has been around for 13 years, so there's definitely a brand in the marketplace. People have heard of us. Obviously, we're not IBM, but people have heard of us. But the sales now have been going okay, apart from the initial bout of cancellations that everybody had in the early months. And we have a data business that was SaaS like, so therefore that took 3 or 4 months before cancellations came through. But everything seems to sort of stabilized. Zoom meetings are okay. I agree with Eric that we don't know what's going to happen 6 months, 9 months, a year into the future as the world opens up. The only good news is that as a CFO, the T&E budgets that were big for media companies are now very, very manageable and tiny, and long may they continue that way.
Okay, and just to piggyback off of what Richard said in regards to some of the cancellations and the spend rebounding to pre-pandemic levels, there's a lot of chatter in the industry just about changing levels of traffic, coupled with a decrease in ad spend. And for example, Fastpay, we've collected a ton of data on the ecosystem, how folks are paying, when they're paying, etc. And we're seeing about a 5% reduction in ad spend through August, and about 40% of buyers are also extending their payment terms. So just curious to see if you guys have seen similar effects on your businesses, and what, if any, sort of industry-wide effects this will have on strategy moving forward. Richard, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I think, like a lot of people in ad tech, we saw a sort of 30 to 40% drop between March and April. And then, so that was pretty scary times. I have to say, I really appreciated the PPP loan that we were able to get, because that gave us some some sort of security, not knowing whether we were going to dip another 20 or 30% below. But what we saw was that from May onwards, it's been a steady rise upwards in terms of demand. And at this point, we're definitely above where we were in the first couple of weeks of March from a demand perspective. We have actually added some new demand that was in process from 2019, but what we've seen is the business has definitely come back, and it's pretty strong. So we're pretty happy with where we are at the moment.
Yeah, so I think there are two parts to the question. One is about ad spend generally. So all I have is our data, right? Our data was, April to April was for our business about flat year over year. And August 2020 to August 2019, we were up 100%. So that should give you a sense of how the business has evolved. We were, as I think everyone in the industry was, rightfully concerned about receivables and whether or not we'd get them. Our DPO has gone down for 20 versus 19 or even 18 or whatever. And I don't know why, but collections have been better and ad spend has been up, which, if you told me in April, that is not the trend I would have expected.
Yeah, I mean, we sort of see it from another lens as a data provider, but what we've seen anecdotally maps to what Eric and Richard have shared, and I think our demand has matched that. It was our agreements are sort of multi-year, and sort of talking to the CMOs and marketing performance leaders at our brands and agency partners. It's been big stall and then a big rebound, and I think the category specific nature of it, which I'm sure we'll talk about as we get into some of the other stuff around Q4 projections, has been interesting. Like CPG has obviously been up. We work closely with Unilever and other folks like that, and it's been interesting to see additional spend layering on there. A lot of our travel partners are way down, so I think also the constitution of the spend is very interesting. But yeah, I think ad tech has in some ways benefited from the virtualized environment, obviously, though people are also dealing with some of the obvious challenges in the space right now.
So I guess on kind of that note, do you think that this crisis is going to cause a change in the interaction between publishers and advertisers? We saw a dip. We see some people kind of coming back, but there's still those industries that are struggling in all areas, but not spending the money in advertising. Do we think that relationship's going to evolve or change at all as an impact of this? I guess, Josh, you want to kick that off?
I mean, look, as a member of the Vanishing Dollar Club, where I have to justify the percentage I'm taking out of each dollar of ad spend, between advertiser and publisher, it's like I think there's going to be a ton of scrutiny there. I think, if it's $1, it gets to what, 60 cents? It's like, I think for a lot of reasons, there's going to be, there's the pressure around every piece of tech that gets a cut of that spend. It's just going to increase. I think that pressure accelerates transparency. If you don't stand up to this scrutiny, you're going to have a bad time. I think, so that's like the broader trend that I see. And I think that it'll be fascinating to see which types of vendors do well. Pretty close to the Xandr folks, and I know there's been the sort of the advent of blockchain type tech to sort of do audits and provide additional transparency has been great. But ad tech as an industry has grown, with a few faults that have sort of been eating at its heart for a while, whether that's fraud or value chain that's so big that dollars get lost, or just relentless targeting. And I think this environment is in some ways, along with a lot of the other trends with walled garden, walls going up and so forth, like it's causing some existential questions around like who's going to benefit and what you need in order to benefit. So I think that sort of question will be answered and is being answered, and so it'll be interesting to see where it goes. The last thing I would say is we really espouse a point of view as a business that, ad tech for a long time and advertising spend for a long time has been very acquisition focused. And I think you're seeing a real push towards making it more full life cycle. And I think brands are sort of thinking of it that way. It's not just about that acquisition spend. It's about thoughtful use of first party data, and being able to cultivate a relationship with the customer over time. So I think providers that can justify their value through that lens will benefit.
Awesome. Richard, do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, definitely agree with a lot of what Joshua said. SPO, more direct relationships between publishers and demand is coming. Some of the big guys are pushing it more. It just means that the advertisers and the publishers just need to be on the same wavelength, and I think it's going to be a little harder for everybody. I think the bigger trend, and COVID has slowed that down, is the business of the third-party cookie, and what happens. How does that get replaced? Who gains power from that? Is it the advertiser or is it the publisher? We think it's probably more on the publisher side, but is there going to be a monopoly or duopoly? So there's a lot of stuff going on around identity and cookies. But in terms of, if you're a small publisher, I think the goal is to try and get as many advertisers onto the site as possible to try and diversify your risk. So I don't think that has changed much. I mean, from our perspective, what we've seen is that the open market demand has actually come back, but the PMP, the direct deals, have not come back. And I think, to what Joshua said, a lot of it depends on who your customers are, which verticals they're in. CPG versus travel.
Okay. And just on top of broader transparency and more thoughtful use of first-party data, what are some positive things that you guys are seeing come out of all of this? Eric, do you want to kick it off?
Out of COVID?
Out of COVID, working remotely with clients, operationally speaking, just general positives that have come out of COVID.
Well, I think I haven't really viewed COVID so much from that light, but so everything that's happening in COVID is happening, in real time with the rest of the world, and so it's hard to maybe separate out exactly what's a COVID specific thing. Certainly, there was a lot of industries had a tumultuous Q2, but that's largely behind us. And certainly things like Facebook with the boycott, which isn't exactly a COVID thing, but it's temporarily relevant. Reallocated spend in a positive way to open industries. But I think, generally what we're seeing in light of, deeper introspection around Facebook and Google and, the antitrust cases and all this stuff, even the thing that was published yesterday about the woman who was a data scientist at Facebook that uncovered inauthentic activity that Facebook seemed to not care about. It is giving marketers some reason to be a lot more thoughtful about where their money is going and how they're spending it beyond just strict KPIs. And I think that will align really interestingly with the way, and this is what both Josh and Richard were saying, was like, the demise of the third-party cookie is going to have a lot of sort of non-linear and unpredictable or difficult to predict impacts on the whole ecosystem. And I think one of them will be those marketers that were strictly using digital advertising for acquisition-based marketing. There will be a much smaller, so even Facebook's pool of data, the amount of data that they use, and Google's, the amount of data that they use is going to get much, much, much worse. And so that means that the the overall ROI of digital advertising from a strict acquisition perspective is going to go down. Like there's just no question. And so then marketers are going to have to make some decisions. One is, do they just reallocate or decrease their overall allocation to digital? And I'm definitely not answering your question now, but I'm sorry. But do they decrease their allocation to digital, or do they rethink how they approach the entire ecosystem? And obviously my hope is the latter, where they start to think of it as a full funnel thing where they have to start thinking about how do they market more effectively in a branding context, be it programmatic or not, whatever. Things like conversion attribution are going to get much worse. Things like frequency capping are going to get much worse. And it just so happens I had this like angry tweet storm about this very thing this morning. For reasons that are unclear, I just felt so compelled. And so I do think that all these events that are aligning at roughly the same time to start to prompt an end-to-end reconsideration of even the point of digital advertising from a marketer's perspective and a publisher's perspective. And so I don't think it's all doom and gloom, but I do think it will look materially different in like 2 years.
I totally agree. Just really want to plus one basically everything that Eric said. I think this panel is about the implications for ad tech, right? And directly or indirectly. And I think the big challenge, and I don't have the answer certainly, is in order for ad tech to thrive, how is it going to adapt to this new reality? And I think the answer is it needs to find its place, and that place may well be smaller, but it's going to be around quality. It's going to be around integrating into full life cycle marketing. We've already seen some of this consolidation, and I just think it's going to be interesting, as Eric notes, to see what happens over the next 2 years.
We're just concerned about the short term, but with what is the medium term? Get through the end of the year, but because we have a data business that relies on third-party cookies. So how is that going to change? How is the advertising going to change? But both of you are quite right that there's a lot of external trends that were happening beforehand. I'd say the good news about COVID is people have learned to work in our industry. They've learned to work from home. I think there were definitely some of the companies have shrunk down, become more productive, which is a good thing and a bad thing, depending on which side you're on. And so I think that people are very focused. And to be honest, I've been very surprised at how well the remote working has actually been able to enable business to continue at a pretty high level.
Excellent. I guess continuing on the trend of forward thinking and, these trends that we've been seeing with data privacy, we had a slew of contact tracing apps that were coming out and kind of really delving into people's privacy. A bunch of laws came out, GDPR, CCPA, New York Shield. In connection with these tracing apps, do you think people are going to get even more inward thinking and not want to share their data, which is going to cause trouble with the ad tracking? Or do you think it's kind of people are going to back away once COVID's over and be more relaxed with their data? I guess, Rich, did you want to kick it off? I'll kick it back to you.
Sure. I think a lot of people are confused about their data, the personal data that's out there, what they can, what they can't do. Even with CCPA coming in, I actually asked our product guy, and he said, since CCPA came in, we've only had like 100 inquiries about their data in 2 months, which means that that's the start. There will be more and more people understanding what's going on with data. But I think that the trend has been away from accessing data, certainly with with Safari, etc. So I think that there needs to be a realignment around data and the ability to target, because without specific targeting, the industry is, to what Eric said, not going to have the same ROIs. And so the industry is going to have to evolve in order for it to be able to keep the spend and keep growing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was Eric that said this, and apologies, Richard, if it was you. One of you smart gentlemen said this earlier, you know, which was it's all about the value exchange that's taking place. You know, when I'm disclosing, you know, what am I getting, you know, in response. And I think for me, it's been pretty clear that, you know, this is different in a walled garden environment. This is different in a publisher environment. This is different by publisher type. You know, so I think that at the end of the day, consumer pressures around privacy and accordingly regulatory pressures around privacy will continue to evolve in conversation with the value that's being provided in response to that data disclosure and the level of transparency that's being provided alongside. It's been really interesting, I'm sure, you know, Eric and Richard, you guys have savvier views on this than I do, to just observe the ways in which GDPR has like either had or not had an impact, depending on, you know, where you sit in the ecosystem. You know, for the average consumer's experience, you know, going to a publisher, you know, the accepting all cookies, you know, sort of conversation is almost it's a non-issue. Everyone just clicks the button. You know, but the existential realities for some of the providers along the value chain have been, you know, significant. So I think it's early, and I think it's kind of it's going to be an almost generational question that evolves over time. But I think people do continue to have a willingness to share information about themselves, and provided there's sufficient value on the other side, and that increased quality, like we were talking about with ad inventory, you know, previously, is going to be the watchword along with transparency. I think if you're on the right side of that, things will go well.
Yeah, I think as a to add to that, like the legislators behind CCPA, GDPR, CPRA, et cetera, are not exactly legislating the interests of individuals. They're like legislating something slightly different. And, you know, as Josh said, like people just accept all the cookies. Like that's, you know, it could not have been the intent for the GDPR, you know, designers to have just these stupid modals on every page that everybody just accepts and like annoys everybody forever. And, you know, I think what should have happened is a purpose-based restriction on data as opposed to like a technology-based or whatever. So, you know, you can use it under these, you can use this sort of data, you can't use this sort of data, you have to get X, Y, Z, you know, like something that just is more aligned with how the world works than what happened. Now, this is obviously wishful thinking because it's not what emerged. And so it seems like, you know, everything just got so broken that the technology, like it's also the case that, you know, opt-in to GDPR pages is extremely high, but that's because it's really annoying to not do that. I don't know how many GDPR requests we've had, but it's all, you know, it's all privacy activists, like 100%. And, you know, it's maybe like double digit, if that, number of people. And so, like, you know, I talked to my mom about this stuff, and she has no idea what's going on with privacy. So, like, I just don't think that the way that it's been done is the way it ought to be done. I don't know how effective me saying this sort of thing is, but hopefully we get to a point that and maybe through the antitrust action on Facebook and Google, we might start to get to a point where data itself is more tightly regulated in its usage than permissions, which is where we are.
Okay. And moving on to a new topic, just in regards to investor sentiment in digital media and ad tech. Obviously, there's been a ton of consolidation in the space over the last 5 years or so. Investment levels peaked from like 2008 through 2012 in digital media and ad tech. Moving forward, considering COVID, the consolidation of the space, and the recent data privacy laws, what are you guys hearing from investors as to their sentiment in digital media in the post-pandemic world? Eric, you want to go first?
I mean, the three of us, I think, run very different businesses. So I'm sure our experience with investors is different. But I think as a general matter, people are looking for differentiated businesses that will sustain where the industry is going, and that have a history of growth and I think increasingly importantly, profitability. And so, you know, 5 years ago, that didn't matter, but today, if you're not a profitable ad tech company, you know, you may never be. And so that's it, right? And they've got to, also, if you say some buzzwords like OTT or whatever, they're gonna love it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think it's also very stage dependent, which is obvious to everybody on the call, but I think it's an important thing to note. Like, you know, great repeat entrepreneurs who've been successful in the space and have strong convictions about where it's going, and to Eric's point, feel like they're on the right side of the value chain and, you know, have the right buzzwords in their deck. Like, you know, they're going to be able to get funded. You know, like that's the reality. I think once you start getting to Series B, C, D, like you need to be showing, you know, the right margin metrics and growth metrics and cost of sale metrics and churn metrics, and it becomes much more of a metrics-based business. And you know, again, as Eric said, we all run very different businesses, but just from general investor conversations and sort of my own experience, it's I agree with Eric. It's what you would expect. There's been a tightening of the screws, and like people are looking at margin more closely. People are looking at profitability more closely, or pathway to profitability. You know, and I would expect that to be the case for the foreseeable, you know, for at least the next, you know, 2 to 3 years, depending on, you know, who gets elected and what happens and, you know, how that environment shifts. But, you know, I think if you can get cash now, it's a great time to be doing it, you know, because I don't think it's going to get easier, you know, and if you're in a position where you need that sort of growth capital, like I know that investors are still cutting checks, and certainly most of the businesses that I'm close to, you know, are thinking about, you know, runways, and if they're not profitable, and if they are profitable, are thinking about scenarios like Richard was sort of speaking to before that may be existential, right? So like, what happens if we are just down 20% in perpetuity, or if key categories for us are affected, you know, and do we have a pathway out of that? And if we need capital to support that, like, how do we make sure we have the right investors beside us that aren't hijacking our business vision, but are investing in ways that support that?
I think I agree definitely with both of you. I think it's investors in generic ad tech that stopped a long time ago, as you said, Jeff. I was certainly there at the beginning with Context Web in 2006. I think investors want more specificity. It's not the generic anymore. It's, you know, you've got to be a little bit more specific in what you're trying to do and how you're creating solutions for either publishers or advertisers. But people are still starting websites and building them, and ad networks have not completely gone away in the you know, they've just changed their colors. So businesses are being funded, but it should be all about margins and cash and growth rate. But I think there's more emphasis on the ability to get to a sustainable cash level than there probably was 5 years ago.
Excellent, thank you. So I guess to do a little more forward thinking, kind of get to our last topic for the panel. Historically, we all know Q4 is the best quarter for most ad tech companies. What do we think is going to come out of this Q4? You know, we saw some dips early on in COVID. We saw some recoveries. What's coming? What do you think's coming? Obviously, we have a foggy crystal ball here, but what are your thoughts on that? And I guess let's kick it off with Rich.
It's a great question. We're not quite sure what is going to happen. You know, a couple of months ago, we were worried about phase 2. You know, was COVID wave 2 going to come along, and was that going to cause more lockdowns? But I think the economy and the country is in more specific. It's not going to be a general lockdown like we had statewide. I think it's much more city by city. So I don't think that particular issue is going to be a big problem in Q4. It's more a question of how are people going to, the marketers going to sell, how are they going to sell their products? I mean, we always have Black Friday, etc. Are things going to be earlier? We've seen a lot of the big box retailers go out of business, certainly around clothes, etc. Does that impact digital in some form or other? But I think we're going to see Q4, a big Q4. It just may not be quite as big as it was from a percentage perspective as it was last year.
Yeah,
that's my prediction.
Yeah, I mean, I think political spending will certainly be helpful, and hopefully save Q4 if, I mean, because ultimately, like, it's interesting. I mean, I think the real, Richard, I agree, and this seems to be the trend of this panel. Unfortunately, conflict tends to lead to better panels, but I just agree with what you guys are saying. But I think, the question is, has COVID affected seasonality, right? Like, and this may be the place where we disagree, because I wonder if it has. Like, I actually, my instinct is that things are changing. People are buying things for their homes that they may have held off to buy for the holiday season now. Like, I don't think that means that spending is not going to increase. And the counter argument there is that people are in relative emotional distress in the ways that Eric discussed, not having left their apartments, not having been able to, feel free and good and open. And that tends to lead to retail spending, because retail therapy is something that we all understand well. So a holiday is a great excuse to go out and spend irresponsibly. And certainly, as I mentioned before the panel, like, I'm as guilty of that as anyone. So, I think it's going to be really dependent on the interplay between those trends and GDP, jobs, actual available cash. Like, are people able to spend and buy, and do advertisers feel like there's enough signal there to keep spending? But the good news, again, of course, is that the political landscape will ensure some level of spending.
Yeah, I guess agree across the board. A couple other points is I think there's so many factors that play off each other that it's hard to come up with a single consolidated effect. One is marketers didn't spend much in Q2, and I think a lot of them have been just ramping up to spend the rest of their budget over the remainder of the year. Political is obviously a big deal. Reallocation from things like out of home and to a degree sports or generally TV is big. But I think, and so all things considered, I don't necessarily a great sense, but our view of Q4 is roughly aligned with the overall percentage that it's been in prior years. But that's also going to be in part because Q2 was a little lower, so we have a little flex to make that happen. The other point is, I think the bigger question mark isn't necessarily Q4 this year, but let's say H2 of next year, which is maybe the start of the post-COVID world. And, what does the economy look like at large for the reopening? And, is there economic growth, decline, whatever? How does it affect the global year-over-year spend and ad change? And even into 22, I think these will be big questions for our multi-year forecasts that are probably not the most optimistic right now, just given the impact that everything's had.
Excellent. So that was fantastic. Thank you all. At this point, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box. We'll extend with the panelists. We'll be here for a few more minutes just to collect those questions. And I guess thank you guys so much. It was very insightful, very helpful. Great answers, guys. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
I think I had one question come up, was that, Josh, you mentioned that it was only going to get harder to get funding into the future, and just a little more insight onto why you think it's going to be so challenging.
Well, this ties to, sort of my own bearish view on where we're headed macroeconomically, fundamentally. I mean, I think, right now, all the funds that are out there have capital to deploy because these funds have been raised and they have to make a certain number of investments. And, obviously they're going to be a little tighter, and more mature funds are going to be able to hold back more, but there's still a fundamental level of activity that you're going to expect to see. I think, some of the more downstream in a year or two, when things are potentially worse, or we're in a longer term recovery. Like, I'm just not a believer that there's going to be a quick V-shaped recovery based on the absolute devastation that's been visited on the economy. Like, I think that's going to be reflected in investor activity. And I think obviously, in particular, I think for AdTech, for a lot of the reasons that we've talked about, it's going to be a tougher sledding. Investors are, exactly as Richard said, like, it's not sufficient to be, sort of broadly categorized. You have to have a sharp view. You have to have a differentiated view. And how much innovation is really going to be happening in the space? If you're an innovative type person, are you looking to AdTech to like make your money and to start a disruptive business? Like, maybe there's opportunities that you see that aren't well captured. But I think we're going to be in a bit of a trough before we come out of it. And I think growth investors have other spaces that they can potentially look to. I think the same things are happening in MarTech, by the way. There's been overinvestment there. There's far too many providers, and a lot of the same pressures that folks expect to see, that Eric was speaking to, are there. I want to see profitability. I want to see pathways to it that are short. I want to see, like, margins. I want to see low cost of technical, operations of the platform. Like, these pressures are real, and the investors are savvy. And when they're worried about their money and their returns, like, and there's not over exuberance in the market in the sense for quick exits and lots of acquisition opportunity, things just get harder. And so that's my own personal take. I don't know that it's common wisdom, but that's certainly what I'm feeling and seeing.
Thank you.
Thanks. And a question just came in, just in regards to the offshoring of tech and operations. How has COVID impacted the activities for offshoring and plans for any potential offshoring in the future due to the pandemic?
I mean, I don't think it's changed our view on that. We already have a team in India and a team in Russia that work with us. And I think that we're just going to keep the same sort of levels of offshoring. We're not thinking of moving more jobs overseas at the moment, just for our particular business.
Yeah, we did a test with offshoring, and we I don't know that we were particularly thrilled with the results, and so we reshored, and we have folks in the U.S. and Canada, and that's where we invest. And like I said, we expect to be remote friendly, not remote first in the post-COVID world. And so because of our decision, and that's just our decision, it won't affect our staffing model.
Excellent. I think we have one more question. What types of advertising media do you foresee as sticking around in the post-COVID world?
I'm not totally sure I understand the question. Is it like
I think it's like, so we were talking about the demise of cookies and things of that nature. Do we think anything's going to pick up even more? Just trying to glean in on what they may have been thinking, but do you think anything's going to pick up a little more because of the change, or is anything going to drop down, dip a little bit because of the change in our new normal, media types wise?
Well, maybe without answering the question directly, I do think that one of the things that we're seeing is an implicit reallocation of budget away from channels that aren't functional right now, like out of home or whatever. And I think that will end at some point. And so right now there's probably an overabundance of digital content consumption that will decline at some point. But that will possibly be offset by the continual shift of linear TV dollars into the programmatic ecosystem. And so it's hard to say what the net effect will be.
I think that was pretty on point, actually. I think we have one more question. Do you think we'll see any additional M&A activity or consolidation in the space? And what are technologies that you're most excited about coming out that either are up and coming or you've been using more consistently?
I think there will be more M&A just because some companies will not be able to get their cost base in line with where their revenues are. But as we've seen, I think I've been predicting consolidation in the ad tech space for quite a few years, and it hasn't really happened in a major way. And part of that maybe the companies that went public did not succeed and therefore didn't get big enough to be able to pull other companies along. In terms of technologies that are up and coming, I think people have to think about the future, what the trends are, and then focus in. I think there's going to be a lot more focus on publisher stuff around identity and data, and maybe bring in some technologies from cybersecurity and other areas that can help improve identity and improve targeting.
Great, excellent. So I just want to thank everyone again. We do have another question, but unfortunately we're out of time. So we're going to have to end our session here. Thank you everyone for all the questions and your interest in the panel. Thank you panelists, that was awesome. We really appreciate your time today, and looking forward to speaking with you again.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks guys.
Bye.
Have a great day.